This is in the American official archive.
Exactly.
Operation Northwoods.
Jones caught this before as well, because it does add a lot of weight to what you're saying about 9/11.
So what was the plan with those people who were on the plane then?
That it wasn't said what happened to them afterwards, but the point is, if the original passengers were on these planes, and I'll tell you something else that happened and how they could lose them in a second. If they were on those planes, well, do you think they want them around to tell their story? Of course not.
Right. So it's a small price to pay.
But let me just say this. You will have come across this, but the vast majority of people will not have done. On 9/11, on that day of all days, there was what was described as an unprecedented number of war games going on in the skies where the 9/11 hijacks were going on.
Just explain what war games are, dude.
Practice scenarios where the military and the Air Force are practicing what they would do in the case of hijackings and threats to America from the sky. There was a long list of them. I list them in the book, a long list of them. And never before have so many been concentrated at the same time. 9/11. One of the scenarios they were playing out while these hijacks were going on was of a plane hitting the National Reconnaissance Office in Washington, D.C. And by the way, when they're playing out these war games, they employ actors and actresses to play out roles. For instance, in the National Reconnaissance scenario, there was smoke bombs going off to simulate the building being hit. There were people on the staff that had scripts to follow in reaction to it, and there were people in the building given phone calls to make with scripts. What's interesting, just going back to the phone calls briefly, is the phenomenal common theme from people at the other end of the phone calls. The people were incredibly calm. They couldn't believe it. They didn't hear any kerfuffle going off the background. Often they didn't really hear plane noises. And as one wife of a passenger said, he talked to me, describing that these hijackers were doing this, that, and the other. He talked to me as if he was calling me from the office at work. If you have one like that, or two, fair enough. But there was a stream of them. And so these war games were going on. Now, on the reaction system to hijackings or attacks from the air in America is orchestrated by an organization called NORAD, an Air Force organization. And the reaction center with regard to 9/11 was a place called Rome in New York State. And I published some of the record of the tapes of what was going on and what they were saying. And when the first reports came in of the planes being hijacked, they were saying, well, one of them said, well, I thought the war games must have started early, right? And they were asking, is this real or is this scenario? Completely confused them. But there's something else. On their screens, and on the screens of air traffic controllers, were simulated planes that didn't exist. It's a system they call Sim over Live. So you've got your live planes, and then you've got your simulated planes.
Right.
And it was done on purpose to create total confusion. In 1999, a golfer called Payne Stewart took off in a private plane with some friends heading to Dallas. And when they got to a certain height, there was a decompression problem, and everyone kind of conked out. So the plane's flying on its own. Everyone's unconscious. Within no time, the air traffic controller has contracted NORAD, which is absolutely the regulations. If you think there's any problem, contact NORAD. That's in the regulations. NORAD has immediately scrambled planes. They're going alongside it. Then other planes come up as it goes through. And what they're doing is they're seeing if there's any life in the plane, inside the plane, but they're also making sure that when this plane runs out of fuel, if it's going to fall on a civilian area or a built-up area, a populated area, they're going to take it out. And that happened with Payne Stewart's private jet, very well documented. The chiefs of staff in the Pentagon, as the media reported, were tracking the plane all the way through. This is the Golfer's plane. On 9/11, in a period of 2 hours, there was not one reaction from the American Air Force military that made any difference whatsoever, because there was a stand down. 10 miles down the road from the Pentagon is the Andrews Air Force Base. This is where Air Force One comes in out. All the foreign leaders come in and out. That's immensely well defended. But on 9/11, they didn't scramble planes from 10 miles down the road at Andrews. They scrambled them from the Langley Air Force Base 130 miles away. For New York, they scrambled them from Cape Cod 153 miles away. And the whole common theme was, didn't get there quite in time. In fact, when the planes were scrambled from the Langley base, supposedly for Flight 77, but it turned out to be something else, actually, the two pilots said they never told us what we were being scrambled for. Let's not forget, by that time, the Twin Towers have been hit. So what they thought, they said, is that I'm being scrambled, as per Cold War scenario, for an attack from the Atlantic. So here's Washington, here's Langley. They went out into the Atlantic before turning around and coming back. And of course, the Pentagon was hit before they got there. And the moment, and this is a big theme in 9/11, until the Pentagon was hit. Once the Pentagon was hit, some of the normal reaction things started to happen, but not until. And there's another...
By that time, most of it had gone on.
Yeah, exactly. And there's another common theme, which is people lying about what they were doing before the Pentagon was hit, which gave them a cover story for why they were not able to react. And once the Pentagon was hit, as the mainstream media reported at the time, they scrambled planes from Andrews, 10 miles down the road, to protect the skies above Washington. Another thing, Washington, and many tenants say the World Trade Center too, is within a no-fly zone called P56. And it's basically based around the Washington Monument. And there's an inner section, there's a middle section, there's an outer section, apparently. And I quote in the book a former U.S. Defense Secretary, Caspar Weinberger, who was asked about the no-fly zone. And he said, well, this is how it works. He said, Washington is ringed with air bases. Among them is Andrews Air Force Base. And if any plane goes in to the no-fly zone without the code that gives it permission to fly there, then it's taken out, right? I quote insiders of the Pentagon who worked at the Pentagon, and this is obvious anyway, describing how the Pentagon is defended by ground-to-air missiles. I mean, it would be, wouldn't it? It's the home of the American military.
So that means basically that they're ready to go straight away. Yeah.
Go inside, you're down.
Where were they on 9/11? And I contacted, because when I was writing my first book, Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster, I was in contact with the FBI, with the Federal Aviation Administration and NORAD, all of them. And I asked them, who polices the no-fly zone over Washington then? And they never gave me an answer of how it's done. Because if they had have done, then a whole can of worms opens. So where was that reaction system on 9/11? Because, you know, what's the point of a no-fly zone if it's not defended? You know? And so if you are highly professional hijackers, which is what we're supposed to believe, you can go on the internet and you can find this stuff out. You can find the reaction times. Just follow the Payne Stewart story. And yet Flight 77, we are asked to believe, was flown 40 minutes out into the Midwest and then turned round and flown back. At 80 minutes it was in the air, 40 minutes after it was known to be, quote, hijacked. And there was no response from the American military that is normally up there in no time. 125 times in the previous year, there were questions about planes, boom, they're up there, but not on 9/11 because it was a stand down. Because there was a guy called Leroy Fletcher Prouty. He wrote books on the Kennedy assassination. He was a big-time intelligence military government insider. In fact, one of the characters in the movie JFK was apparently based on him. He died just before 9/11, actually. And he was describing assassinations, but of course this fits perfectly as well. And he said, if you want to know who was involved in an assassination, look who had the power and used it to remove the normal security.
What's that, Goodfellas, isn't it?
Yeah,
right. I'm the commandant.
Yeah,
like
removing the normal security systems, because as he pointed out, assassinations, in like 9/11 too, are not just made to happen. They have to be allowed to happen, because otherwise the normal security responses would stop them happening. So you have to stand them down.